For generations, one version of the story dominated popular imagination. Rome abandoned Britain, the island fell into darkness. Then, across the gray waters of the North Sea, new peoples arrived, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. They came with ships, weapons, strange gods, and a language that would one day become English. The old Britons were pushed westward. A new people took their place, and from the ruins of Roman Britain, England was born. It is a powerful story. It is simple, it is memorable, and it is incomplete. Because beneath the fields of England, inside ancient graves that sat undisturbed for more than 1,500 years, another story was waiting. Not written in ink, not carved into stone, not preserved in the chronicles of kings and monks. It was hidden in teeth and bones, in the fragile fragments of DNA carried by ordinary men, women, and children who lived through one of the most important transformations in British history. Today, ancient DNA is forcing historians to look again at the people we call the Anglo-Saxons. Not because the old story was entirely wrong. The migration was real. The cultural transformation was real. The birth of early England was real. But the evidence now shows something far more complicated, far more human, and far more fascinating than a simple tale of invaders replacing everyone who came before them. The people of early England were not the product of one migration. They were the result of many encounters, conflict and cooperation, settlement and survival, language and identity. Newcomers and locals becoming neighbors, families, and eventually something neither group had been before. By the end of this documentary, you may never hear the words Anglo-Saxon in quite the same way again. If you enjoy evidence-based documentaries that uncover forgotten history through archaeology, ancient DNA, and the latest scientific discoveries, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to UK Bloodlines, and turn on notifications. Every week, we explore the hidden stories that challenge what we thought we knew about the past. Now, let us travel back to a Britain that existed centuries before anyone called themselves English. Imagine standing on a hillside in southern Britain around the year AD 300. Below you, the landscape does not look like a forgotten island on the edge of the world. It looks connected, alive. Roman roads cut across the countryside in long, deliberate lines. Market towns draw farmers, traders, craftsmen, soldiers, and officials from miles around. Villas rise among fields and estates. Forts guard frontiers. Ships move across the channel carrying pottery, glass, wine, oil, grain, coinage, letters, and news from the wider empire. This was Roman Britain. For nearly 4 centuries, Britain had been one of Rome's most distant provinces. But distant did not mean isolated. Latin appeared on inscriptions. Roman law shaped administration. Bathhouses, temples, amphitheaters, and military camps transformed parts of the landscape. Goods and people moved between Britain, Gaul, the Rhineland, the Mediterranean, and beyond. But beneath those visible signs of imperial rule lived people whose roots reached much deeper. Long before Roman legions arrived in AD 43, Britain had been home to diverse Iron Age communities. They farmed the land, built hill forts, traded across the Channel, spoke Brittonic languages, worshipped local gods, and belonged to tribal worlds with names still remembered from Roman writers. The Iceni, the Brigantes, the Catuvellauni, the Silures, the Ordovices, the Dumnoni, and many others. The Roman conquest did not erase them, it changed them. Some local elites adopted Roman habits. Some families lived in villas. Some people used Roman coins, wore Roman-style clothing, or participated in Roman religious life. Others kept older customs alive. Most probably lived somewhere between these worlds, adapting as circumstances required. Roman Britain was not a clean replacement of one people by another. It was a society built in layers. A local farmer might use Roman pottery while speaking a Brittonic language at home. A soldier born in Britain might serve beside men from the Rhine frontier, Gaul, Syria, or North Africa. A merchant from the continent might marry into a local family. A child born near a Roman road might grow up surrounded by customs older than Rome and objects brought from hundreds of miles away. Identity was already complicated. That matters. Because when people imagine the end of Roman Britain, they often picture an empty stage. Rome leaves, the lights go out, the Anglo-Saxons arrive. But history did not happen that neatly. By the early 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was under immense pressure. Civil wars weakened central authority. Armies were needed elsewhere. Imperial command became unstable. Eventually, formal Roman administration in Britain collapsed. Soldiers were withdrawn or stopped receiving support. Officials lost power. Local leaders were left to defend territories, manage resources, and survive in a world where the old imperial guarantees had vanished. For a long time, this period was described as a dark age, and in some ways, life truly did become harder. Long-distance trade declined. Many towns shrank, some villas were abandoned, coin use faded, centralized Roman administration fractured. Political authority broke into smaller regional powers. Communities faced raids, rivalries, and uncertainty. But Britain did not become empty. Fields continued to be farmed, families remained in old landscapes, local communities adapted. The descendants of Iron Age Britons and Romano-British people were still there, living through the collapse of empire, not as a dramatic ending, but as a difficult new beginning. And across the North Sea, other communities were watching. Along the coasts of what are now northern Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands lived Germanic-speaking peoples, whom later writers would remember as Anglo-Saxons and Jutes. Their connection with Britain did not begin suddenly after Rome fell. For generations, the North Sea had been a route rather than a barrier. Traders crossed it, raiders crossed it, soldiers crossed it. Mercenaries from Germanic-speaking communities had served in and around the Roman world long before the so-called Anglo-Saxon migration. So, when Roman authority weakened, the sea did not separate two strangers. It connected old neighbors. Some newcomers may have arrived as warriors hired by local rulers. Others came as settlers seeking land. Some may have followed kinship networks already established across the water. Some came through violence, others through opportunity. Human migration rarely has a single cause. It is usually driven by fear, ambition, hunger, alliance, survival, and hope all at once. Over time, these movements changed Britain. Settlements appeared, burial traditions shifted. New forms of dress, jewelry, weapons, buildings, and language spread across parts of the island. But one question remained almost impossible to answer. How many people actually came? Were they a small warrior elite whose language and culture became dominant? Were they large communities of migrants arriving with families? Did they replace the people already living in Britain? Or did they merge with them? For centuries, historians argued over these questions with limited evidence. The written sources were few and often late. The most famous came from the Venerable Bede, the 8th century monk whose account of the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes shaped how later generations imagined the birth of England. Bede is invaluable. Without him, our knowledge of early medieval Britain would be far poorer. But he was not an eyewitness to the first migrations. He wrote centuries later using the traditions, records, and religious perspective available to him. Archaeology added more pieces to the puzzle. Across eastern and southern England, excavations uncovered cemeteries filled with objects that looked strikingly similar to those found across the North Sea. Brooches, beads, weapons, belt fittings, cremation urns, and burial customs suggested powerful continental links. At first glance, these discoveries seemed to confirm the old migration story, but the more archaeologists excavated, the less simple the picture became. Some cemeteries contained continental-style objects beside evidence of local continuity. Some settlements showed new building traditions, while older farming patterns continued nearby. Some communities seemed culturally Anglo-Saxon in their grave goods, but that did not automatically prove every person buried there had recent continental ancestry. That distinction became crucial. Material culture can reveal identity, it can reveal fashion, it can reveal social status, it can reveal trade, belief, and belonging, but it does not always reveal ancestry. A person can wear a style adopted from another culture. A local family can learn a new language. A child descended from Britons can be buried with objects associated with continental traditions. A migrant family can adapt to local customs within a generation. Culture can move faster than people, and identity can change faster than ancestry. For decades, this made the Anglo-Saxon debate difficult to solve. The graves were speaking, but not clearly enough. The objects told historians how people wanted to be seen in death. They did not always reveal where those people's grandparents had lived. Then, the evidence changed. Scientists began extracting ancient DNA from human remains. At first, the process was difficult and fragile. DNA breaks down over time. Samples can be contaminated. Results can be incomplete. But laboratory methods improved. Sequencing became more accurate. Researchers began comparing ancient genomes from early medieval England with genomes from Iron Age Britain, Roman Britain, and continental northwestern Europe. Suddenly, the debate had a new kind of evidence, not a perfect answer, but a powerful one. The bones could now speak in a language historians had never heard before, and what they revealed did not simply confirm one side of the old argument. It transformed the question. Ancient DNA showed that migration from continental northwestern Europe into early medieval England was real and significant. In some regions, especially in eastern England, ancestry related to populations around the North Sea could form a major part of the genetic picture. The newcomers were not just a literary invention, they were real people, arriving in real numbers, shaping real communities. But the same evidence showed something equally important. They did not create England alone. The people already living in Britain did not simply vanish. In many places, individuals with continental ancestry and individuals with more local British ancestry lived in the same regions, shared cultural practices, and became part of the same emerging society. Some early medieval cemeteries reveal communities where ancestry and burial identity did not match in a simple way. A person could have local ancestry and still be buried in a style associated with Anglo-Saxon culture. Another could have continental ancestry and be part of the same community landscape. That was the breakthrough. The old debate had asked whether the Anglo-Saxons replaced the Britons. The new evidence suggested a better question. How did migrants and local populations become part of the same society? And the answer was not the same everywhere. In eastern England, the genetic impact of migration appears to have been especially strong. That makes sense. The east faced the North Sea. It was the natural landing zone for people arriving from the continental coast. In regions such as East Anglia and parts of eastern and southern England, the continental contribution could be substantial. But farther west and north, the picture changed. Earlier British ancestry remained stronger. Local continuity appears more visible. The transformation of identity did not follow a single national pattern because there was no single England yet. There were regions, communities, networks, kingdoms, and frontiers, each changing in different ways. Early medieval England was not born all at once. It emerged unevenly, one valley at a time, one settlement at a time, one family at a time. And this is where the story becomes deeply human. Imagine a child born in a village in the 6th century. One grandparent may have had ancestry from across the North Sea. Another may have come from a family rooted in Britain since Roman times or earlier. The household may have spoken Old English. The fields they farmed may have been worked for centuries. Their burial customs may have reflected the new culture growing around them. Their identity may have been completely real, even if their ancestry was mixed. That child was not half of one history and half of another. That child was the future. Because identity is not only inherited, it is made. It is learned through language, law, marriage, work, worship, food, stories, loyalties, and the world a child grows up inside. This is why many historians now treat Anglo-Saxon less as a single biological group, and more as a cultural and political identity that developed over time. It included migrants and their descendants, but also people whose ancestors had lived in Britain long before those migrants arrived. And that may be the most important revelation of all. The Anglo-Saxons were not simply outsiders who replaced Britain. They were part of a transformation in which newcomers and locals created a new society together. If this documentary is changing the way you see early England, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to UK Bloodlines, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think of the Anglo-Saxons more as invaders, settlers, or the founders of a mixed new identity? Your perspective may inspire a future episode. Now comes the second twist. DNA did not make the story simpler. It made it richer. For years, people hoped science would settle the argument once and for all. They wanted a number, a clean answer, a final verdict. How Anglo-Saxon was England? How British did it remain? But the past refused to behave that neatly. Large-scale ancient DNA studies point towards substantial continental ancestry in many early medieval individuals, but also clear survival and integration of local British ancestry. They show regional differences. They show mixed communities. They show that genetic ancestry, burial style, language, and identity did not always line up perfectly. In other words, DNA did not replace archaeology. It explained why archaeology had looked so complicated. Those mixed cemeteries were not contradictions. They were evidence of a society in motion. Those changing fashions were not just signs of conquest. They were signs of people negotiating belonging. Those regional differences were not problems in the story, they were the story. And perhaps nothing shows this more clearly than language. Old English spread across much of what became England. Its impact was enormous. It shaped the names of villages, fields, rivers, tools, laws, poetry, kingship, and everyday life. Without the Anglo-Saxon period, the English language as we know it would not exist. But language shift does not require total population replacement. History gives us many examples. Latin spread across the Roman Empire. Arabic spread across vast regions of the Middle East and North Africa. English spread globally in the modern period. In each case, people adopted new languages for reasons that could include power, trade, marriage, religion, law, opportunity, or survival. Something similar appears to have happened in early medieval England. Old English became dominant across much of the lowlands, but not every Old English speaker needed to be descended entirely from continental migrants. Many likely carried mixed ancestry. Some may have had deep local roots. Over time, language became one of the strongest tools for creating a shared identity. That identity continued changing. Christianity transformed the kingdoms of early England. Monasteries became centers of learning. Latin returned as the language of church scholarship. Kingship grew more complex. Law codes emerged. Poetry and oral tradition preserved heroic memories. Trade connected England to the wider North Sea world. Then came another wave of transformation. Viking settlement, Danish rule, renewed migrations, and eventually the Norman conquest. England was not formed once. It was formed again and again. This is why the ancient DNA revolution matters so much. It reminds us that the birth of England was not a clean ethnic replacement. It was a long process of interaction layered upon earlier layers. Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, Bronze Age migrants, Iron Age Britons, Roman-era communities, North Sea migrants, Vikings, Normans, and countless others. Every generation inherited a world already shaped by movement. Every generation added something new. And that brings us to the deepest lesson hidden inside the DNA. Ancestry and identity are connected, but they are not the same thing. A person can inherit genes from many places and still belong fully to one culture. A community can change language without erasing every family that lived there before. A kingdom can be founded by migrants and locals together. A people can become real over time. The Anglo-Saxons were real. Their migration was real. Their culture was real. Their influence on England was immense. But they were not a frozen biological category. They were not a single pure population. They were not the only ancestors of the English. They were one powerful chapter in a much older and more complicated story. And once you understand that, early England becomes far more interesting than the old legend, not less, more. Instead of a simple invasion, we see families forming across cultural lines. Instead of disappearance, we see survival. Instead of one people replacing another, we see communities changing under pressure, opportunity, and time. Instead of a clean origin story, we see the messy reality of human history. That messy reality is exactly what makes the past worth studying. It refuses to flatter our assumptions. It refuses to stay simple. It reminds us that the people buried beneath ancient fields were not symbols in a modern argument. They were human beings. They worried about harvests, children, sickness, marriage, loyalty, faith, land, and survival. They lived through a world changing around them, often without knowing what history would one day call them. They did not know they were becoming part of Anglo-Saxon England. They were simply trying to live. And from those lives, a new world slowly emerged. By the 7th century, early English kingdoms had taken shape across much of the island. Names such as Kent, Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Essex, Sussex, and Wessex began to matter. These kingdoms competed, converted, fought, married, negotiated, and expanded. Some had strong continental cultural roots. Others developed in landscapes where British and Roman inheritances still lingered. All of them belonged to a Britain still being remade. The story was not finished. It never is, because every new discovery adds detail. A grave excavated in Cambridgeshire, a cemetery studied in Kent, a skeleton sequenced from an early medieval burial ground, a pattern discovered in the genomes of people who lived more than 1,000 years ago. Each one changes the picture slightly. Each one pulls us away from myth and closer to lived reality. And the picture now emerging is astonishing. The Anglo-Saxon migration helped transform Britain. The Romano-British population survived and contributed to early England. Continental ancestry was strongest in some regions and weaker in others. Culture and genes did not always move together. Language became a powerful force in creating identity. The English people were not born from one bloodline, but from centuries of movement, mixture, conflict, adaptation, and memory. So the next time someone says the Anglo-Saxons simply arrived and replaced the Britons, remember the people beneath the soil. Remember that some carried ancestry from across the North Sea. Some carried ancestry rooted in Britain. Many carried both. Remember that they may have lived in the same villages, shared the same fields, raised children together, and helped build a new society whose legacy still shapes the world. The bones buried beneath England's churches, cemeteries, and fields were silent for more than a millennium. Now science is allowing them to speak, and their message is not simple. It is something better. England was not created by one people alone. It was built by everyone who became part of it. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more evidence-based explorations of ancient DNA, archaeology, forgotten civilizations, and the hidden origins of nations, like this video, subscribe to UK Bloodlines and turn on notifications so you never miss the next journey into the past. And before you go, tell us in the comments, did this change the way you think about the Anglo-Saxons? Were they invaders, settlers, founders, or something more complex than all three? We'd love to hear your thoughts, and your comment might even inspire a future documentary. Until next time, remember this: history is rarely as simple as the stories we inherit. But it is almost always more extraordinary than we ever imagined. Because the closer science brings us to the people of the past, the more we discover that history was never just about kings, battles, or empires. It has always been about people. People whose choices shape nations. People whose stories still live on, and perhaps people whose DNA is still part of us today.